do. I have a master's in nonprofit management, and he has a background doing that kind of the for-profit side. So we started working with him. We launched 12 ventures, and we realized at that point that that's what we know how to do, to take an idea, to translate into action. Our 6-week summer program is developed like a business plan. It starts with value proposition, goes all the way into resource development, and the opportunity to get someone in with an idea and translate to action has become proven. From that point on, it's for Nina and it's for the others to take them further. What that means for me in terms of funding, also we figured out that what we're good at is we're not going to launch public health programs. We're not good at unions. We know the things that we know in terms of within the Jewish people, so education, social action, environment, philanthropy, and the arts, where technology connects those fields. That's what we know how to do. And so if funders can be realistic about themselves, they come from a background in terms of building medium to large size organizations, and thereby they know where they are in the value chain. They can work with people to help grow from that point forward. If funders understand that people need a runway, but they don't need to have a perpetual highway, and in doing so know what part of the runway they're at, and thereby where people are supposed to take off. I think that understanding the field and understanding the stage is critical, and being comfortable saying, I don't do more than that.
In our business, we have what we call a patient capital attitude. We're not publicly traded. We don't have to worry about quarterly earnings reports and what's going to happen to our stock price. And that allows us to really take a longer-term perspective on the return on our investment. So I'm wondering if you four can comment on whether or not having a patient capital approach is relevant to funding innovation. And in particular, now that we're in a time of crisis, how do we think about patient capital when needs are so pressing?
Well, I mean, I'll start with that just because we use that phrase a lot. I mean, patient capital lets you do a lot of things. We have an investment in Pakistan, housing development for the poor, former slum dwellers who can take basically what they were paying for rent and buy a home over a period of time. It costs about $3,000 to buy the home, and it's a self-sustained community. That project, as many that we fund had historically, basically had a lost year. It took an entire year longer than we thought for it to get where they said they would get. And it basically took an entire year longer because the entrepreneur we backed wouldn't pay a single bribe. And you know, if you're in Pakistan and you want to get a water line and you want to get electricity and you want to get sewage, you just pay a little bit of speed money here, a little bit of speed money there. So it allowed us as a funder, is a loan that we were actually forgiving over time, some of the payments. It allows us to do that. I mean, again, it's really the question of what do you think the fruits of innovation look like? So I don't know if it takes more time or less time, but I think the leading indicators are not as straightforward as you would think. It's not to say, to Sarah's point, that you sort of, you know, a year passes and gee, nothing's happening, and 2 years passes, nothing happens, but let's get around and talk about it. But you know, do you understand this person that you've invested in? Do you understand their theory of change and what motivates them? And do you have a sense that, you know, are the wheels coming on or the wheels going off? We do a forced ranking of our portfolio every 6 months, and what's interesting is this sort of graph, and you know, it sort of starts out and we fall in love with it, and then it kind of goes like this, and it almost goes bankrupt. And some of them, you know, fall off the cliff, and some of them really rebound. And we don't quite have a big enough portfolio and enough experience to get better at predicting, although we fall in love a little bit less quickly now. But I think it's experience of doing that and really understanding.
I would say the human capital investment, I'm very impatient. And money is different than time in this case. And I have learned personally, and I encourage others to do the same, that when it isn't working out and you're spending a lot of time on something that looks as if it's just going to keep hitting the wall, cut your losses.
I actually think of patient capital as something that's actually political. I mean, I think we're at a time where what % of the government owns what % of the banks, and what % of nonprofits are starting revenue generating for-profits. I mean, what a world. And if you think about, there's another one of our world, Bill Drayton, who started Ashoka. And Bill Drayton, for the last 20 years, has been talking about how the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sectors are starting to converge. So for instance, the freelancers union, because health insurance wasn't working for our members, we just started our own insurance company. So surprisingly, I'm the CEO of an insurance company 11 weeks ago, and we raised $17 million to start it. We actually have better capital reserve rates than, I don't know, AIG, but, but that's not hard. And so, but the reason why I think it's political is that I think that you could just imagine now you're the mayor of Syracuse, and some company comes to you and says, I'm going to start a business here, and it's going to employ 1,000 people. and it's going to create a return on capital of 2%. Well, that mayor is going to love that because now that you have 1,000 people who are employed and paying taxes, you can do an awful lot with that. So I actually think that the idea of patient capital is something that in 10 and 20 years is going to play out, as we could imagine a role of government playing that role. That the philanthropic world could start doing more PRIs, program-related investments that are charitable, and we already have that tool to show how we could be using capital and getting a return for that, getting some kind of discipline around having something be sustainable. So I think patient capital is far huger than the ways we've just begun talking about it in the sector.
Just to build very quickly on that, I want to introduce a term here that for me means a lot and for us means a lot, which is the concept of social capital, and that not everything is financial in its ability to help sustain something. I mean, in the end, you know, the thing that we've learned, like I said in the beginning, is that communities really sustain the innovators. Their income and their revenue stream can rise and fall when they have people they can support, rely on, do partnerships with, and develop together with. It becomes much more than just the money itself. So I think that in terms of patient capital for specific programs and ventures, as opposed to patient social capital, if you will, sustaining communities, enabling those communities to grow and to really bring in others who seek to do more for the world, I think that's an important thing.
I want to go back to something that Cheryl said, talking about get out quick when something doesn't seem to be working. I'm not sure if we all believe that we as a funding community do that or don't do that well. But do we have any counsel from any of the four of you about how to identify when something truly isn't working systemically built into the proposition, it's just not going to work, versus don't throw it away because we just have to make a couple tweaks here and there? How do you refine that, that discernment and get out fast?
I think it depends on what you made a bet on, right? So if you made a bet on a team that you thought could execute, and that team is working well, is focused, is collaborating, and that idea didn't work, then don't get out quickly. If you bet on an outcome, you don't see that. You know, so I mean, I would ask the question a different way.
But I think as a general rule, the nonprofit world is reluctant to let things fail. And I think in a time of limited resources, we may all have to acknowledge that there will be failures. You know, there isn't even a system in New York, as I understand it, from very high-priced lawyers, for nonprofits to go out of business. It's a very complicated process involving attorneys general in most states. And quite frankly, we haven't even begun to talk about how to engage failure into helping other nonprofits. In other words, there are limited resources. It may turn out, after lots of collaborations happen, after we come together with all sorts of innovation, that some just shouldn't be in business anymore. And how do we do that in a way that allows everyone to prosper?
I mean, I might have a bit more patience in the early round, but in terms of late, I mean, our board member Mark Chess does long-term stuff, so he knows that much better than I. I'll leave that to him once we get to that point where we're doing long-term investments. In terms of the short round, for startups, if people are investing in innovation, I think it's the second that you see that an ego is getting the best of the impact. That is when someone's more excited that people are inviting them to conferences and doing the work that they do.
Nothing wrong with conferences, though.
What?
Nothing wrong with conferences.
Nothing wrong with conferences. I mean, you know. No, but seriously, I mean, in the end, it's about rolling up your sleeves and doing your work. And I can just say that I'm sure that all of us know people who seek more the fame of it and the light of it than actually go out into the field. And so when we see fellows that are not going out into the field and not doing their work, it becomes a problem. And so, you know, we'll invest as much patience as possible in terms of our organization in someone who's at it day in, day out and still sees the problem and still is trying to solve it from a different way and perspective. The second that they're more interested in the glory, it doesn't make sense for us to continue.
We've been hearing about case examples of innovation throughout the three bands as I described them at the beginning. However, what I'd like to do is ask you, as you feel compelled to make a case for funding breakthroughs, funding that step change innovation, especially at a time like we're in right now. You can start.
Okay.